Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today, The 7 Deadly Sins of M&A. Today's webinar is hosted by ShareVault, a leading virtual data room provider that allows for simple and secure sharing of sensitive documents in the cloud with broad business applications, including the distribution of due diligence documents for M&A, partnering, licensing, investor communications, and many other secure document sharing applications. My name is John Badger, co-founder and vice president of marketing and product here at ShareVault. Today's webinar is number 19 in the ShareVault webinar series, and it's our 5th webinar specifically focused on the topic of M&A best practices. The presenter today is David Stastny, founder and managing director of Centaur Partners, a rapidly growing technology-focused investment bank in Palo Alto. The Centaur senior team has completed over $5 billion in M&A transactions and private placements. During David's long investment banking career, he's held senior investment banking positions at Soundview, Oppenheimer, and Robertson Stephens, and has been a lead or senior banker on numerous premier technology IPOs, follow-ons, buy and sell-side M&A transactions, hostile takeover defense, private placements, spin-outs, and restructurings. Our previous webinar topics have focused on various aspects of preparing for an M&A transaction. Today's presentation is going to focus on how you can maximize your exit by avoiding the common traps that can hurt valuations or even kill a deal. David will go into the 7 top potential deal killers, hence the title, The 7 Deadly Sins of M&A. David will outline how to discover, isolate, and correct for these pitfalls in advance so that your eventual deal can move forward with maximum valuation. Before we get started, just a couple of logistical details. This webinar is being recorded, and we will send it out to all attendees soon after the presentation. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Your individual audio is muted due to the size of our audience today, so please type questions into the GoToWebinar question box as they arise. So let's get started. David.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Now, our presentation is going to be oriented toward technology companies. Our firm is a technology investment bank. So some of these areas will be particularly focused on that type of transaction. So talking about tech companies are bought, not sold. That means that the largest buyers, potentially the public buyers, are fundamentally looking to companies at all times. The IBMs, the Oracles, the Citrix all come to the marketplace looking for companies to add to their portfolio. The sellers of a technology company or any company need to understand how to take the external view. They need to view their company from the outside in because that's the way the buyers are going to look at you. So the next slide talks about being prepared. Okay? And fundamentally, what we have here is a survey that was done by Price Waterhouse, which is one of the key accounting firms that does technology deals. And these key accounting questions, this is what the sellers and the buyers were asked. What would you have done differently in your tech M&A deal? Here's the results of the survey. Performing more seller due diligence or pre-sales prep, 37% of the respondents said that was something they would do differently. Having more bidders at the table, which is something that a firm like Centaur Partners can help you do, is extremely important. The buyers said that they didn't do enough due diligence before entering into a term sheet or even not enough due diligence during the process, which is interesting after you see the 7 deadly sins. And finally, no audits. If you don't have an audit, there's a very low probability that the larger company will buy your company or your stock. They will most probably buy your assets, which is not a good thing for the selling company. And we'll talk about that later. Why should you care about the 7 deadly sins? Well, let's talk about what happens during the diligence process and what could happen to your deal. Buyers back away from 50% of the deals where they start due diligence. That means after the term sheet is signed and after you've spent months and months getting to the point of trying to sell your company, the due diligence, if you fail, half of the buyers walk away, half the deals go away. So this is really critical to be prepared before you start this diligence process. 85% of the deals in tech companies end up with a lower purchase price at close than what was in the term sheet. Now, there's a lot of ways that a buyer can reduce the price. He can make a vesting for all of the founders. He can change the terms of the deal. He can add an earn-out component. So if he's offering you $50 million, he can put $20 million in a 3-year earn-out. He can build a large escrow account, which we'll talk about later. He can make the payments contingent in many different ways. So those are ways the buyer can pay less. And 67% of the deals in tech M&A have post-closing purchase price adjustments, typically coming out of the escrow account. And you should assume that if you put together an escrow account, you're never going to see it if there's a post-closing purchase adjustment. So what you need to do is you need to address the deal killers in advance. And it will make your deal move faster. It will also make the buyer be much more probable to pay the price he put in the term sheet. So time is not your friend. The longer the diligence process is stretched out, the more probability that these purchase price adjustments will occur. Buyer due diligence. We have a picture of our SWAT teams. We deal with the largest tech buyers in the world, folks like IBM and Cisco, EMC, HP, Google, Microsoft. In many cases, these people will send a team into your organization of 20, 30, 40, 50 people. And in many cases, the buyer's SWAT teams are larger than the companies they're buying. So buyers really do care about what they're getting. The SWAT team will descend upon you and simultaneously look at every aspect of your business. And what you're trying to do is continue to run your business so your sales, bookings, and opportunities don't fall off a cliff during this period. Normally, if the seller hasn't been prepared for this, they're scrambling to meet the due diligence requests of the buyer. Now, these teams from the IBMs and the Ciscos and the EMC are battle-tested. In some cases, they've done over 100 M&A deals. They know exactly where to look. You're not going to hide your problems. They're going to find them. And if they find them and you haven't disclosed them, then you're in a very difficult position. There's a mismatch of the buyer's due diligence team and the seller's resources. As I said, some of these M&A teams are bigger than your company. So their process and execution are core competencies. If you look at companies like Cisco or IBM, they've done over 100 acquisitions. They're very good at it. You need to be prepared. The teams that typically descend upon you are a strategy team to figure out how you integrate into the sales and marketing organization, a finance and operations team, a legal, HR, and an IT team. The buyers will make their own assessment of the health and hygiene of your business after they sign the term sheet. And there's no deal until there's a definitive agreement, and that's typically 60 to 90 days after they start their due diligence. If the buyer passes during diligence, you may never know why. And if you go back into the market, the next buyer might find the same issues. Buyers back away from 50% of the deals in diligence, and so be prepared to be on your best behavior during that period. So the 7 deadly sins we're going to go through one at a time. Here's the list of the key areas. So let's start with deadly sin number 1, and this is the most important. This is validation of benefit to the buyer. Now, someone in the organization is your champion, and that champion is the one who sent the diligence team to your site. And so fundamentally what you want to do is provide evidence to support their case. And in some cases you have to build the synergy case for them. So you actually have to build the sales and marketing and synergy case for the buyer. I know you think you shouldn't have to do this, but I'd say in half the situations you do. Will your customers validate the value? The buyer will call your customers and disclose what's going on. And will your customers validate that this is a good deal? Is your team aligned to articulate value to the buyer, to the strategy team? And they're going to do a deep dive into your organization, and they're going to look at your pipeline. They're going to look at every customer, every opportunity that fundamentally is on your pipeline. So this is the first and most important hurdle. If you can't validate your business, the deal will fall apart, and your champion in the organization will go away. So this is where you need to spend a tremendous amount of time validating. Deadly sin number 2 is ownership of your intellectual property. Can you provide evidence that you own your IP? Do you have patents? Do you have trademarks? Are there any lawsuits? Are there any known infringements? Are there any assumed infringements? Is there any IP in dispute? Do you know what third-party technologies are being used in your product? In the software business that we work, there are a couple of products. One is called Black Duck, another is called Palamita, that will allow you to search your code and find out, do you have someone else's code in your code? In many cases, this can stop or slow a deal. And this is a high risk to timing, because if you find you're infringing or using someone else's code, you have to go get a license or an ability to be able to use that code and sell your product in your company. And this may take months or quarters to rectify, all of which will slow your deal and lower your value. Going back to gain these permissions or remediate and pull out the third-party code is extremely difficult on a deal. Deadly sin number 3, threats of litigation. Again, potentially around IP, around customers, around former employees. Are there potential lawsuits? If there are real lawsuits or potential lawsuits, it will be found in due diligence. And you will be forced to put those into your reps and warranties. And if they come up and you lose the lawsuit, even after the deal, you'll have to pay out of the escrow or may have to remit some of the purchase price back to the buyer. Are there other exposures in your capitalization table? Ex-employees, customers, vendors? And all of this will slow the deal and force you to have a bigger escrow account. Legal fees before the due diligence are much less expensive than during the due diligence phase. In Silicon Valley, we see some of the law firms come in and say that our flat rate to do the due diligence is $150,000 to $200,000 during a deal. It's a lot less to work hourly prior to the deal. There's also a payback liability here. In addition to the escrow account, you may have to write in the documents you'll pay back up to 100% of the purchase price to resolve any litigation within 3 years of the deal. Deadly sin number 4, accounting exposures and conformity. Do you have an audit, and can you face the scrutiny of a public company audit? Many small companies can't. Normally, if you can't, it ends up being an asset deal. Do you have public company rev rec, bookings, deferred revenue practices? Are your forecasts credible? Are they consistent? Can you prove your pipeline? Have you identified exposures in advance and shown them to your potential buyer? What kind of cash flow will you have at closing? What's your balance sheet look like? Are you in good standing? And assume that most of your deferred revenue will be written off by the buyer. So, in deadly sin number 4, 5 is just accounting questions. We won't go through these one by one, but you can see the ones that are almost always asked. Your last audit, have you had to restate? Do you have foreign entities? What are your intangible assets? Have you changed how you recognize your revenue? What are your bookings and backlog? Are they separate from deferred revenue? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is an area that they'll push on very heavily. Deadly sin number 5 is basically company agreements. And one of the key issues is, are the agreements transferable? If you have OEM agreements or joint code agreements or IP agreements, if they're not transferable, you have a big issue. Can you gain consents if they're not transferable? And what's the timing? Are there non-standard terms? Is there a change of control provision that will change the price, the terms, the length of the contract? This can be very expensive to clean up during the battle, during due diligence, so they should be cleaned up prior to the due diligence. The other part of this that's important in corporate governance, exposures, and risk sections are our management, the investors, and the board in agreement on how the distribution of proceeds occurs. In many cases, we've seen where an offer is put on the table by the buyer, and there is an argument or disagreement between the management, investors, and board. The buyer only uses that to reduce the value of the deal and increase the size of the escrow account. Deadly sin number 6, HR and employee risks. Do you know who your key employees are, and will they stay? This discussion should occur well before the diligence team gets to your site. Are there change of control terms? Are there acceleration? Are there severances? Are there bonuses? And have they been disclosed to the buyer prior to this diligence session? Are your contractors really contractors? Or will the buyer assume, based on their employment practices, that these are actually employees? Do you have all your employees signing proprietary rights agreements with current and ex-employees? We see many cases where ex-employees come back during this period and ask for payoffs, even though you thought that their employment issues or founder issues had been handled. Have you kept up with best practices for employee reviews, performance improvement, bonuses, and termination? If not, there's potential litigation. And it's amazing how many employee disputes will arise during the deal process. You need to make sure those are addressed before the HR due diligence teams come into your office. John, did you want to make a statement here also?
Oh yeah, just stay tuned for an upcoming webinar in about a month, early part of July. We'll be doing a webinar on HR best practices when selling your company, and that'll be by Brian Moriarty, who is Vice President of M&A HR at Hewlett-Packard. So stay tuned for that. It'll be a fantastic webinar as well.
So deadly sin number 7 is not having a firm handle on your capitalization structure and what the payouts are to employees, investors, founders, debt holders. There's a couple of things in here that you should target. When a company buys your company, they're typically buying all your employees. And typically when a company is sold, we see ways for the employees' options to accelerate. The two most common are a single trigger. When the company buys the smaller company, that basically accelerates the vesting of options for all employees, management, founders. A more advantageous way to increase the value of your company is to have a double trigger, which says the company sells, and the only way the employees' options vest is if they get demoted. That's much more valuable to the company and will help to retain the employees. Escrow coverage. We've talked about the reps and warranties. The buyer will typically ask for 10 to 30% of the total purchase price to go into an escrow account. That escrow account is typically 1 to 3 years, and if it's a 3-year account, typically it's released in annual installments. Then the buyer can come back and ask for claims against that account to pay for undisclosed liabilities or liabilities that come up post-closing. And there are many, many, many of these charges that the buyer can ask for escrow to be deducted from. So what you want to do is you want to do a very specific and very detailed disclosure document which discloses everything that might happen and try to exclude that from the market basket of escrow. Market baskets shows that in the escrow account there's a minimum amount that has to be disclosed by the buyer in order to go into the basket. And then there are ways to insulate yourself against losing the entire escrow account, like getting third-party insurance. Okay? If you see the graph here, deadly sin number 7, this is particularly valuable if you have preferred stock and common stock. And what we're trying to show here is if a company sells for less than the preferences that are in the preferred stock, that in many cases the employees and the common stockholders don't make a lot. So what we see here typically is the investors will put together a basket of a few $1 million to pay out to the employees that is completely separated from their common stock. Oh yeah, just one more thing. So we had 7 deadly sins, but there are hundreds of subcategories. And one of the things that our firm does is we do an assessment where we'll come out and do a transaction readiness assessment of a company. And we'll ask you several hundred questions from the 7 deadly sins and others. And we'll come back and tell you where you're all right, where you may be in a caution area, or where you're really in trouble. You want to do that 3 to 12 months prior to going on the market to sell the company. Typically, you'll get from the bigger buyers a 100-plus page diligence list. And the data room, your share vault, will be scoured. And make sure that anything you put in that data room, you're ready to support and ready to be able to address. And they are Columbo on steroids. That ends the formal part of our presentation. Please submit any questions you might have via your webinar.
All right. We're going to do a brief demo next. This is David Mosley, Director of Sales here at ShareVault, who's going to give us a very brief demo of ShareVault, and then we're going to jump into the Q&A section. Make sure and stick around because, in general, a lot of good questions get asked in these webinars, and the answers to those questions are always very informative. So let's jump into the demo.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, John. Again, my name is David Mosley. I'm Director of Sales here at ShareVault. And I'm going to take you through just a brief tour of ShareVault's virtual data room platform. As John mentioned earlier in the webinar, we are very active in supporting investment bankers and their clients, target companies, and supporting sell-side M&A transactions through successful completion. I'm going to log us into ShareVault, and I'm going to show you what the experience is like from that of the administrator. Those of you who will be responsible for getting the data room set up and prepared for due diligence. So when I log us in, we land here on the main documents tab. This is where, as you can probably guess, this is where your documents are going to live once they're published into your ShareVault. I'm going to show you how easy it is and friendly it is to get documents into your data room. I'm simply going to go out to my desktop and grab a group of documents that I've got already prepared and nicely organized in a folder system. I'm just going to take operations here. I'm just going to drag and drop it into this staging area. And when I do so, you'll notice that it presents my folder structure exactly as I have it on my computer. Okay, so then I can simply just take all of my folders and just add it to my existing index here to the left. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to click on Publish. And a couple of things are going to happen now. We'll return to the Documents tab, and we can monitor ShareVault's progress in doing 2 things. One, it's creating an additional folder structure within ShareVault and keeping the exact hierarchy of primary folders and subfolders and subfolders just as we have organized on our computers. And in addition, it's bringing documents in as well. And as it's bringing documents in, it's creating a secure and encrypted PDF version of everything that's not already in PDF, including Excel, PowerPoint, and Microsoft Word documents as well. It'll do so on over 350 file types. So now you can see we've very quickly and very easily have added some documents and folders to our data room. Under admin, this is where you as administrators and deal managers will think about the types of security policies you want to put on your documents. These are the tools that you're going to use to protect your documents. You're going to be putting in confidential and sensitive information into your data room, and these are the types of things or the types of tools that you will use to protect your documents. You may have competitors involved in your process, and this is a good way to keep those guests involved in your project from just running off with your documents. Under users and groups, ShareVault has a very nice permissioning tool. I'm going to open it up here, which will allow you to control what documents, folders and documents that you would like to give access to your end users. It's easy to stage access. You don't have to give your end users access to everything that's in your data room. So with this easy permissioning tool, it's quite simple to control that level of access. Additionally, you can then control how it is that you want them to interact with your documents. And these would be the security policies that we would have thought about just a moment ago under admin. Okay, and then lastly here under users and groups, we want to bring to your attention the capability of protecting your user's identity. Quite often, if you're involved in a competitive process, you're not going to want end users knowing of one another's presence within your data room. It's very important in many processes to keep those identities from becoming revealed mistakenly. Through ShareVault's privacy setting management tool, we can help you achieve that. ShareVault's reports help deal managers understand or research, track, and monitor how your end users, how your potential buyers are spending time in your data room. We provide you with two different reports. There's an activity summary, which provides you with a high overview of activity by group. You'll get an understanding of how end users are spending time within your index, which documents are of interest to them. And then we also have a great audit trail here as well, probably the more powerful of the two reports. And you can define your report by time. These are all the activities that ShareVault will record and report on, again by group or user, and then lastly by document as well. So results, as you'll see here, will give you a really good sense for the user, the activity performed by viewed documents or deleted documents. I can see the document in question here, and then the scope of the activity as well. Okay, and then lastly, we have a great Q&A tool. This allows you to take questions in from your end users. They might have questions about your deal in general, or they might have questions about specific documents. And then this is where you, as a Q&A moderator or a deal manager, can go to answer those questions. So that concludes our brief demo. I know that's a really quick and brief tour. If there is interest in seeing or taking a deeper dive into ShareVault's capabilities and performance, we'd be happy to arrange another demonstration for you. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, David, for the demo. We're going to jump into the Q&A section now. We encourage you to go ahead and type questions into your question box, and we'll cover the questions that we've already received in sequence here. But please feel free to jump in, ask questions either about the content that was prepared, that was presented today, or about ShareVault in general. So let's go into the first question here from Lloyd. In reality, what is the typical state of a company's contracts when they need to find and review them for the pitfalls that you've outlined? How long does this contract review process typically delay the due diligence process?
So it's as varied as the companies we deal with. Usually smaller companies that have many, many contracts, are in the worst shape because they don't have the resources to be able to organize and to screen the contracts. So we've been in companies that have 20 total employees that may have 1,000 contracts. Typically what the buyer will do is sample 25 to 30 of those contracts. If they find discrepancies or irregularities, they'll do a deep dive, and that could slow the deal down for months. The bigger the company and the more probability of good contracts is if they have a few big customers, if they have a CFO, and in some cases if they have a VP of legal. Those are typically the quickest turnarounds. So it can vary from a couple of days, or it can slow a deal by months or quarters. Good question. Very good question.
Okay, so we have another question here submitted by Sam. For a small selling company, will buyers accept less than a full formal financial audit, and is review by an independent accounting firm sufficient?
So if a public company is buying a private company, which is most of the transactions we see, they will not integrate the financials of a private company without a full audit. Because what they don't want to do is taint their financials and cause them to have to restate to their public shareholders, and it causes a significant amount of problem. So if you can't get an audit or don't have an audit, the most probable way they're going to buy your team is an asset sale. They will come in and they will tell you what they're buying. And usually it comes down to people and their employment contracts, the code, the IP, the customer, the accounts receivable. That's bad for the seller because they're leaving you the liabilities. They're leaving you the liabilities of former employees. They're leaving you the liabilities of your debt. They're leaving you lots of liabilities. So, no, a public company typically won't buy a private company unless you have a full financial audit. If you don't and you can't get one, they'll buy your assets.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Let's say, in terms of the appropriate strategy for staging information access during the buyer due diligence review process, what would be your priority order of documents? And that's actually a question from Mike.
So typically we'll give our seller a list of what should go into the share vault, what ought to go into the diligence repository. It usually is difficult for them to get all those documents in simultaneously, so we tell them what are the priorities. Now typically what we'll do is we'll tell them to have multiple levels of access to the share vault. Anything that's not particularly proprietary should be at level 1, and we should give access to anyone who's interested in being a buyer. Then we'll have a level 2 where there's some sensitivity, and we normally will ask the buyer to sign an NDA or potentially get to a certain level in the process, like a term sheet. And then there's level 3, which are the important documents, the ownership structure, any special deals with the employees, anything that if it got out to the public may harm the company. Normally we'll ask for an NDA from the buyer, and also they have to be at a very high level of interest at that point. Typically there'll be hundreds of documents in the share vault, and we try to make only a few be at that level 3 so that we can move the process along.
Great. Here's a question from Allie. What are typical fees for iBanks for M&A? Monthly retainer plus success fee tiers, minimum dollar levels. What are the typical structures there?
Typical structure is a monthly retainer, and that can vary greatly depending on the amount of work, but I guess the ranges you might look at are $10,000 to $30,000 a month for most investment banks. And typically the success fee starts with a minimum fee. That minimum fee is a base fee no matter what the company sells for. And then as higher levels of enterprise value are attained, the fees will go up and will compensate the investment bank for their good work.
Okay, good. Okay, given this question is from Alan. Given the consolidation of large companies and fewer buyers, is there a growing market of mid-sized companies looking to acquire?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, there are. There are a much larger group of mid-sized public and mid-sized private companies that are now moving into the market as buyers. We're finding some very interesting things in technology. Companies are waiting longer to go public, and they're raising rounds of capital that are like public offerings but from the private market. I'll give you one example. We're working with a company called Cloudera. Cloudera is a company that's a private company. I won't disclose their revenue, but it's a lot smaller than you would think. And they recently did a round of financing and raised $900 million from Intel Capital at a $4 billion pre-money valuation. That group could continue to do M&A deals for the next 10 years without having to go public. Many, many private companies are getting very large rounds of funding and are moving into the buyer's market that never would have done so 5 years ago. So yes, very good question. We are seeing a whole legion of smaller companies entering the buy-side marketplace.
Okay, great.
So we got a question that just came in of any horror stories. Yeah, there's a lot of horror stories. I'll give you one that just comes to mind. We were selling a company a few years ago, and we had gotten a bid of $30 million for the company. The bid had come from Microsoft, and Microsoft wanted our CTO to come up and see if he could integrate into the organization in Redmond, Washington. Long story short, Microsoft went silent. They offered our CTO 10 times his salary at our company. He went to work for them, and within 6 months, our company went out of business. So that's just one of many, many horror stories that we've had from our days. So you have to really make sure there's a good intellectual property employment contract in place, because in this case, there was no non-compete for their CTO. So just one horror story, but if anybody would like to email me, my email is dave@centaurpartners. I could share some other horror stories if you so desire.
Okay, I have another question that's come in here from Steve. What's been the most common reason that diligence fails?
It really is the first deadly sin, where the champion within the company wants to buy your company, and when the team comes in, they can't validate your customers, your pipeline, your synergies, your code, and your business plan. It's very unfortunate, but when some of the smaller companies' senior staff is put under pressure, many times they don't give the same response. So the buyer's team will come in and talk to one senior executive and ask what the forecast is. Then they'll have an independent meeting with a second senior executive and an independent meeting with a third senior executive. None of the answers match. When that happens, normally diligence falls apart. So the first reason is that the buyer can't validate the business case. And if you can't validate the business case for the buyer, all the other 6 deadly sins really don't matter.
Okay, here's actually a question from Richard. Do you work with serial acquirers, and how is working with them different from sort of first-time acquirers?
We, a part of our business is on the buy side, where we will go in and work with typically late-stage private companies, and we'll act as their outsourced corp dev department. Well, of course, when we're doing that, we turn the deadly sins around, because our job is to find reasons to buy the company for less. So yes, we do. It's not a big part of our business. Most of our revenue is working with sellers, but in some cases we're hired by late-stage private companies to be their corp dev department. And at that case, we take all of the diligence we've learned from IBM and Cisco and Citrix and EMC, and we turn it around. So seller beware.
Great. Okay, well, we're 45 minutes through the program, and typically we like to tie up after 45 minutes. So this is a good time to finish up. Thank you, David, for coming in and for taking the time not only to present the 7 deadly sins, which was an outstanding presentation, but also for spending time to dig into the questions that we got, which were very good questions. Thank you, everybody, for submitting those questions. As a review, you will be receiving a copy of the slides, so stay tuned from an email from us about that, as well as an audio-video file that you'll be able to review the entire webinar, so stay tuned for that. And remember, our upcoming webinar, it's not on our website yet, but it will be in a couple of days, for HR issues in M&A, given by Brian Moriarty, Vice President of M&A HR at Hewlett-Packard. So that's a one to stay tuned for, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar. Thanks for joining.